Long before the Silk Road, a vast web of connections already spanned the continents. This is the story of the prehistoric trade networks that silently linked the farthest corners of Eurasia. You will discover how ancient peoples moved more than just goods, trading ideas and technologies across thousands of miles. We will trace the journeys of volcanic glass from Turkish mountains, follow sacred jade from Central Asian rivers, and uncover how golden amber from Baltic shores reached Egyptian tombs. How did these exchanges happen without maps or money? What forgotten pathways laid the very groundwork for civilization itself? By the end, you will see the deep, ancient roots of our interconnected world. What do you believe is our most enduring human impulse? That first tentative meeting at the river was not a simple transaction. It was the spark of a system. To understand these ancient networks, we must first redefine what trade meant in a world without markets, money, or merchants. For these early communities, exchange was woven into the very fabric of social life. It was not merely swapping a flint blade for a handful of obsidian. It was the ritual gift that cemented an alliance between neighboring groups. It was the shells or polished stones given in a marriage, binding families together. These acts of giving and receiving created obligations, built trust, and established a web of relationships that stretched far beyond any single village. Archaeologists draw a crucial line between local exchange and long-distance trade networks. Local exchange is the lifeblood of a region, where goods like everyday tools, food, or pottery move between nearby communities. But long-distance trade is something else entirely. It involves materials that are exotic, non-essential, and often imbued with profound meaning. Think of that brilliant volcanic glass from a mountain 600 miles away, or the lustrous seashell found deep inland. These items did not arrive by accident. Their journey required a sophisticated, knowledge-based system. Someone knew where the material originated. Someone knew the routes, the safe passes, the communities along the way who could be trusted. This was not random barter. It was a purposeful, structured flow of objects across staggering geography. So how did a piece of jade from Central Asia end up in a Chinese village, or Baltic amber reach the Mediterranean? One of the most elegant models explaining this is called down-the-line trade, championed by archaeologist Colin Renfrew. Picture it not as a caravan making a months-long journey, but as a long, slow relay race. Community A, living near the source of a special stone, trades some of it with their neighbors in Community B, a few days' travel away. Community B then trades some of that stone, now mixed with their own goods, with Community C farther down the line. The original material moves incrementally, hand to hand, community to community. With each exchange, its story grows, its value increases, and its point of origin becomes more mythical. Through this simple, repetitive chain, an object could travel hundreds, even thousands of miles without a single person making the entire trip. This was the silent, patient mechanism that connected continents. It was a fundamental social adhesive, weaving a thin but incredibly resilient thread of connection across the vast and unknown landscape of prehistoric Eurasia. That slow relay of objects required something truly special to get it started. It needed a material so unique, so visually striking and practically perfect, that communities would pass it along for hundreds of miles. Enter obsidian. Born from the fiery heart of volcanoes, this volcanic glass cools into a substance of almost supernatural qualities. Fracture it, and it breaks with edges sharper than any modern surgical steel. Polish it, and it gleams with a deep, mirror-like blackness. For a Stone Age toolmaker, it was the ultimate material. A blade crafted from obsidian was a masterpiece of utility, capable of cleanly slicing hide, wood, or flesh with an efficiency that ordinary flint could not match. But its value went far beyond the practical. That glossy, jet-black surface held a mystique, a connection to the powerful and distant forces of the earth. It was not just a tool, it was a treasure, and we know exactly where these treasures began their long journeys. Modern science gives us a kind of time-traveling detective tool. Every flow of obsidian has a unique chemical fingerprint, a specific blend of elements that acts like a birth certificate. By analyzing a tiny fragment of an ancient blade found far from home, archaeologists can match it precisely to its volcanic source. This fingerprinting has revealed a map of astonishing reach. One of the great hubs was in central Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey. The ancient settlement of Çatalhöyük, one of the world's first large proto-cities, thrived in part because it sat near rich obsidian deposits. From here, the glass traveled. Pieces sourced to these Turkish mountains have been found over 600 miles away, reaching communities across the Fertile Crescent. But the story grows even more impressive when we look to the sea. In the Mediterranean, the Lipari Islands, just north of Sicily, were essentially a prehistoric obsidian factory. Their entire economy was built on mining and exporting this coveted glass, and export they did. Lipari obsidian has been recovered on islands and coastlines throughout the central Mediterranean, from Italy to the coasts of France and Croatia. Some of these voyages required open water crossings of more than 100 miles. This tells us something revolutionary. By the Neolithic period, people were not just walking trade routes, they were sailing them. They possessed not only the nautical skill to make these journeys, but the geographical knowledge to know where to go, and the social connections to ensure a welcome upon arrival. The objects they carried tell us what was valued. Alongside practical blades and scrapers, we find exquisite obsidian mirrors, polished to a high sheen, likely used in rituals. There are finely crafted arrowheads and spear points, speaking to its role in hunting and conflict. There is even evidence it was used in early forms of surgery, its scalpel's sharp edges making precise cuts possible. Each of these items, whether a humble cutting tool or a ceremonial object, was a node in a vast network. The movement of obsidian proves that Neolithic communities were anything but isolated. They were connected by a web of knowledge, relationships, and daring travel. They knew of lands far beyond their horizon, and they maintained regular, purposeful contact with them. This was not a random scattering of villages. It was a connected world with valuable commodities flowing steadily along its invisible highways, laying down the very first patterns of global exchange. While obsidian offered the sharpest edge, another stone captured the ancient heart and mind. Deep in the riverbeds of the Kunlun Mountains, where Central Asia meets the Tibetan Plateau, a different treasure lay waiting. For over 8,000 years, people have waded into those icy, rushing waters to collect smooth, water-worn boulders of nephrite jade. Unlike the volcanic glass, jade is incredibly tough. You cannot chip it like flint. To work it requires a supreme act of patience, grinding it for untold hours with abrasive sand and water. Why would anyone devote such immense labor to a stone? Because to the cultures of ancient China, nephrite was not just a mineral, it was the stone of heaven, a substance believed to contain the very essence of the cosmos, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. This spiritual hardness made it the ultimate symbol of virtue, power, and eternity, and it was this profound meaning that fueled one of history's most enduring and long-distance luxury trades. The desire for this sacred stone created networks that stretched for thousands of miles. We see its power in the elite burial grounds of prehistoric cultures like the Hongshan in the northeast and the Liangzhu in the southeast. In these resting places, individuals were accompanied by stunning jade artifacts that tell us everything about their world. There were the mysterious Kong tubes, square on the outside with a circular bore inside, thought to represent the ancient Chinese belief in a square earth beneath a round heaven. There were the flawless bi-discs, perfect circles with a central hole, symbols of the sky and celestial authority. These were not mere decorations or displays of wealth. They were ritual objects, tools of spiritual power, and the very emblems of a ruler's right to lead. To possess jade was to hold a piece of the cosmic order. This insatiable demand in the Chinese heartland created a pull, a magnetic force that drew the stone from its distant sources. So how did the stone of heaven travel from the remote Kunlun Mountains to the ritual centers of early China? The answer lies in a web of pathways now called the Jade Roads. These were not single highways but a series of overland corridors, most famously those skirting the northern and southern edges of the forbidding Taklamakan Desert in the Tarim Basin. This was a journey through some of the most extreme landscapes on Earth. The transmission likely did not happen through direct caravans from source to destination. Instead, it almost certainly moved through the same down-the-line trade we saw with Obsidian, but with a fascinating twist. The key intermediaries were likely the early pastoralists, the nomadic herders who moved with the seasons across the steppes and mountain valleys. These communities were the logistical masters of the ancient world, their mobility making them perfect connectors between settled agricultural societies. They could access the highland jade sources, trade for it, and then carry it northward or eastward, passing it from group to group in a great, slow arc across the continent. This trade in jade was about far more than moving a pretty green stone. It was a vehicle for the transmission of an entire cultural package. With the jade came the ideas. The specific shapes of the Kong tubes and bi-discs, and the complex belief systems they represented, traveled along the same routes as the raw material. Artistic styles, symbols of authority, and cosmological concepts moved from community to community, adapting and evolving along the way. The Jade Roads became channels for diplomacy, for the exchange of technologies like metallurgy, and for the gradual intertwining of disparate worlds. Where Obsidian connected through practical necessity, Jade connected through spiritual aspiration and political ambition. It shows us that the earliest global networks were not built on basic economics alone. They were forged by the human desire for meaning, for connection to something greater, and for the symbols that could make that connection tangible. The silent movement of this stone across mountains and deserts helped lay the ideological foundations for civilizations to come. But the story of these ancient connections is not just about stone. From the frozen forests of the north came a material that seemed to hold light itself. Along the storm-lashed shores of the Baltic Sea, after a tempest, people would walk the beaches and find treasures washed up by the waves. Not shells or driftwood, but lumps of warm, golden, translucent amber. To them, this was not fossilized tree resin. It was solidified sunlight, the tears of gods, or the very essence of life preserved for eternity. This captivating substance, glowing like a captured sunset, would ignite a trade network that rivaled the Jade Roads in its reach and complexity, the Amber Road. From at least the Neolithic period and exploding during the Bronze Age, this route formed a great artery of exchange. It stretched from the Baltic coast in the north, down through the heart of Europe, to the shining civilizations bordering the Mediterranean Sea. The journey was immense, covering well over 1,000 miles, yet we have proof that it was completed. In the royal tombs of Mycenaean Greece, archaeologists have found beads of unmistakable Baltic amber. Even more astonishingly, in the burial chamber of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, among the gold and lapis lazuli, lay a beautifully carved scarab beetle. Scientific analysis confirms it, too, was crafted from amber that originated in the faraway Baltic region. How did a lump of tree resin from a Scandinavian pine forest end up in the tomb of a king on the Nile? The value of amber was not merely decorative. Across many cultures, it was believed to hold powerful amuletic and medicinal properties. It was thought to protect against illness, to ward off evil spirits, and to bring good fortune. Rubbing amber creates static electricity, a mysterious life force that seemed magical to ancient peoples. It could be burned as incense, ground into powders for remedies, or worn as a protective charm. This perceived power made it a commodity of immense spiritual and social worth, desired by elites from the forests of Germania to the palaces of Crete. The actual movement of this golden treasure reveals a world of sophisticated intermediaries. The Amber Road was not a single, supervised highway. It was a chain of contacts controlled at various points by different societies who understood its worth. In the north, coastal communities harvested the amber and likely began the first exchanges with inland groups. As it moved south, it would pass through the hands of Central European cultures like the Unetis people, master bronze smiths who controlled key trade routes. Farther south, it would reach the influential societies of the Alps and finally the Mediterranean traders who had access to Egyptian and Greek markets. Each group added value, both literally and culturally, to the material as it passed through their lands. This network shows something profound. The frigid, forested north of Europe was not a backward periphery. It was an integral, active node in a pan-continental system. The communities there were not isolated. They were connected through a slow but steady relay of trust and mutual benefit to the glittering centers of civilization thousands of miles away. They possessed something the Mediterranean world deeply craved, and they engaged in an exchange that brought them, in return, bronze, exotic goods, and ideas. The Amber Road teaches us that these prehistoric networks were truly democratic in a geographic sense. They linked the entire continent, from its sun-baked southern shores to its misty northern forests, in a continuous, humming web of human connection. Long before empires rose to formalize these routes, the desire for beauty, meaning, and connection had already done the work. A lone charioteer would have seen nothing but an ocean of grass, a horizon that curved with the earth itself. This was the world of the Eurasian steppe, a vast corridor stretching from the edges of Europe to the gates of China. For too long, we have imagined the nomadic peoples who mastered this landscape as peripheral figures, isolated wanderers or fearsome raiders on the fringe of history. But the archaeological record tells a very different story. These mobile pastoralists were not outsiders to the network. They were its architects, its most dynamic and essential agents. Their seasonal rhythms of movement did not create barriers. They wove the very threads that connected distant worlds. Think of the steppe not as a blank space on the map, but as a prehistoric superhighway. While farmers were rooted to their fields, nomads were in constant, predictable motion, following the grazing cycles of their herds. This created natural communication corridors, well-trodden pathways that snaked between mountain ranges and skirted deserts. A family group migrating from summer pastures to winter valleys was not just moving animals. They were carrying news, gossip, technological gossip, and physical objects from one river basin to the next. They became the living, breathing postal service of the ancient world, connecting settled civilizations that would have otherwise remained ignorant of each other's existence. The profound impact of this mobile culture is etched into the foundational layers of Eurasia itself. Take the Yamnaya people, who emerged from the Pontic-Caspian steppe over 5,000 years ago. Archaeologists studying their burial mounds, known as kurgans, have found evidence of early wheeled vehicles and the domestication of the horse. These were not just tools for survival. They were revolutionary technologies of connection. With wagons and mounts, the scale and speed of movement across the steppe exploded. The Yamnaya did not just spread their own culture. Genetic and linguistic studies suggest they played a pivotal role in dispersing the early roots of Indo-European languages, the family of tongues that would eventually give rise to languages from English to Hindi. Their movement was a cultural broadcast. Farther east, the Andronovo culture, which flourished across Central Asia, showcases another critical nomadic contribution: metallurgy. The steppe is rich in copper and tin, the essential components for making bronze. The Andronovo did not just mine these metals, they became master smiths and distributors. Their distinctive metal artifacts, from elegant daggers to robust axes, have been found across an enormous territory. They were not merely making tools for themselves. They were feeding a vast interregional demand, connecting the ore sources of the Urals with the consumers in the cities of Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. The nomad was both miner and merchant, smith and salesman. This redefines our entire understanding of these networks. The sedentary civilizations, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Chinese, were often the glorious in points, the consumers of exotic luxuries like jade and amber. But it was the nomadic pastoralists who operated the vital middle passage. They were the intermediaries who could navigate the terrifying open spaces between agricultural oases. They understood the languages, the customs, and the dangers of the long-distance route. A piece of Baltic amber did not magically appear in a Mycenaean palace. It was passed through a series of trusted exchanges, from the hands of a northern harvester to a steppe herder, who carried it south to the edge of the farming world, where another specialist trader would begin the next leg. The nomads provided the continuity, the trust, and the logistical knowledge that made continental trade possible. So the next time you think of the Silk Road, picture not just camels and caravanserais, but the millennia of groundwork laid by charioteers on the open grass. Their legacy is not one of conquest alone, but of connection. They turned the greatest geographical barrier on the continent into its most effective conduit, proving that sometimes the deepest roots of our interconnected world are not found in cities of stone, but in the timeless rhythms of movement under an endless sky. The golden glow of amber and the deep green of jade traveled overland, but some of the most powerful connectors in the ancient world came from the sea. Far from any coast in the middle of a continent, an archaeologist's trowel might uncover a small, glossy shell. This is no accident of nature. It is a signature, a tiny, durable testament to a network that spanned oceans and continents. Among these marine treasures, two stand out for their astonishing journeys: the humble cowry and the dramatic Spondylus, or thorny oyster. Their stories reveal that the most powerful drivers of trade were often the smallest, lightest objects, charged not with practical use, but with profound social and spiritual meaning. From the warm, shallow waters of the Indian Ocean, particularly around the Maldives, came the cowry shell. Smooth, porcelain-like, with a distinctive slit opening, it was harvested in unimaginable numbers. What made this shell so irresistible? Its form was consistent, durable, and nearly impossible to counterfeit. It was small, lightweight, and easy to count. In essence, it possessed all the perfect qualities for a form of money, and that is exactly what it became. For over 4,000 years, cowry shells served as one of the world's first and most enduring currencies. But their journey from Maldivian beaches to the hands of people far inland is a map of human connection. Vast quantities of these shells traveled north and east, reaching the heart of ancient China, where they were used in commerce and even placed in burials as currency for the afterlife. But perhaps their most remarkable journey was westward, through complex trade routes, both overland and via maritime circuits that hugged coasts. Cowry shells from the Indian Ocean crossed the vast expanse of Asia and Africa. They became the standard monetary system in the kingdoms of West Africa, used for everything from buying goods to paying taxes, right up until the colonial era. A shell from the Maldives, used to purchase cloth in Timbuktu, represents a chain of trust and exchange of truly global scale, centuries before the term global had any meaning. Meanwhile, in the clear blue waters of the Aegean Sea, a different shell held sway. The Spondylus is not subtle. It is a large, rough, vividly colored bivalve, often a deep orange or purple with long, intimidating spines. Unlike the cowry, it was not money. Its value was ceremonial and social. For the Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures of Europe, Spondylus was the ultimate prestige material. It was painstakingly ground and polished into bracelets, pendants, and beads, which then made an incredible journey northward. Finished Spondylus ornaments have been found in graves and settlements hundreds of miles from the sea, deep in Central Europe, in what is now Germany, Austria, and the Balkans. To wear Spondylus was to declare a connection to the distant, powerful, and mysterious Mediterranean world. It signaled elite status, membership in a far-reaching network of exchange that brought exotic beauty to the interior of the continent. The distribution maps of these two shells tell a silent but eloquent story. They chart not just trade routes but channels of desire. Cowries and Spondylus were not traded for their utility. You could not eat them, hunt with them, or build a shelter from them. They were traded for what they represented: access to distant power, participation in a ritual system, or a tangible symbol of wealth and authority. Their lightweight meant they could be carried in great quantities over immense distances, making them ideal vehicles for this kind of value. They show us that the earliest economies were not built on bare necessity. They were built on meaning. A chief in Central Europe adorned with Spondylus, or a merchant in West Africa counting cowries, were both participating in a world much larger than their own village. They were linked through an invisible web of give and take to harvesters in distant seas they would never see. This trade in seashells proves that the human impulse to connect, to assign value to the rare and beautiful, and to use objects to tell stories about ourselves is one of the oldest forces shaping our world. The most valuable cargo moving along these ancient pathways was not something you could hold in your hand. It was knowledge. While precious stones and shells changed hands, an even more transformative exchange was happening in silence: the transfer of technology. This silent trade of ideas reshaped the very foundations of societies across Eurasia, often long before the physical goods arrived. Consider the smith working high in the Caucasus Mountains over 5,000 years ago. Through patient experimentation, they discovered that adding a small amount of arsenic to copper produced a metal far superior to anything seen before. This was arsenic bronze, harder, more durable, and capable of holding a sharper edge. This was not a secret kept in one valley. The knowledge of how to create it, the precise recipes and techniques, began to travel. It moved not as a written manual, but as a skill passed from master to apprentice, from community to community along those same exchange networks. The technology rippled outward, east toward the Indus Valley, and west into Anatolia and Europe, transforming local economies and the nature of conflict. Wherever it took root, societies with access to superior bronze tools and weapons gained a significant advantage. This pattern repeated with other revolutionary innovations. The concept of the wheel and axle, likely originating in the region around the Black Sea, did not spread as a finished product. It spread as an idea, a brilliant solution to the problem of moving heavy loads. Different cultures then adapted the principle to their own needs and materials, leading to solid wooden wheels for carts, and later, the spoked wheels essential for light, fast chariots. The chariot itself represents a cascade of transmitted knowledge. It required not just the wheel, but advanced woodworking, leatherworking for harnesses, and eventually the domestication of the horse powerful enough to pull it. Each piece of this technological puzzle moved along the trade and communication corridors, often assembled into its final, world-changing form far from where its individual components were first imagined. Perhaps no single technological transfer had a more profound impact than that of the domesticated horse. Originating on the Eurasian steppes, the horse was initially likely used for meat and milk. But the moment steppe pastoralists mastered horseback riding, the geography of the continent shrank. the horse became the ultimate tool of mobility, a living engine that revolutionized transport, transformed hunting and herding, and reshaped warfare. This knowledge how to breed, train, and ride these powerful animals spread with astonishing speed along the very networks the nomads themselves maintained. From the steppes, it moved into the heartlands of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and eventually China, altering the destiny of empires. With the horse came other bundled innovations. The breeding of sheep for their wool rather than just meat created a new textile economy. The knowledge of how to process wool into yarn and weave it into fabric traveled alongside the animals themselves, offering a new form of wealth and comfort. Even agricultural practices like new varieties of grain or more efficient irrigation methods were shared and adapted as communities interacted. These exchanges reveal a fundamental truth about our ancient ancestors. They were not just trading objects, they were trading solutions, a new way to smelt metal, a better design for a wagon, a more effective breed of sheep. These were the ultimate commodities. The networks of exchange became a continental nervous system, transmitting pulses of innovation across vast distances. An idea perfected in one mountain range could, within a few generations, change daily life in a river valley 1,000 miles away. This silent, collaborative project of human ingenuity, facilitated by trust and mutual interest, was the real foundation upon which civilizations would later build their monuments. It reminds us that our shared progress has always depended not on isolation but on connection. The silent relay of shells and stones moved to the steady rhythm of footsteps and hoofbeats, but there was another, far more powerful current shaping these ancient exchanges. Water for our ancestors, a river was not a barrier, it was an open road. A coastline was not an edge, it was a welcoming corridor. Long before paved highways, the world's great waterways functioned as the original superhighways, carrying not just people and goods, but the very seeds of civilization itself. Think of the immense labor of dragging a heavy load of grain or a large block of stone across rugged terrain. Now picture that same load resting securely in the hull of a dugout canoe, carried effortlessly by the current of a great river. The difference is not just one of effort but of scale. Water transport revolutionized what was possible. It allowed for the movement of bulk commodities, timber, grain, livestock, and heavy building stone over distances that would have been economically impossible on land. This capacity to move heavy loads in quantity is what enabled the first large, complex societies to emerge. Where did these aquatic highways run? Across the globe, the pattern is unmistakable. In Europe, the Danube River acted as a central spine, connecting the cultures of the Balkan heartlands with those of Central Europe. To the east, the Dnieper River provided a north-south conduit from the Baltic region toward the Black Sea. In South Asia, the mighty Indus River was not just a source of water, but the main commercial artery for the entire Harappan civilization, with goods moving from the highlands to the coast. And in East Asia, the Yellow River and the Yangtze formed the dual circulatory system of early Chinese culture. But it wasn't just rivers. Coastal navigation was equally vital. A skilled group with a simple raft or a hide-covered boat could travel incredible distances by hopping along coastlines, using predictable currents and staying within sight of land. The Black Sea coast connected the steppe peoples with Anatolia and the Balkans. The Persian Gulf served as a liquid crossroads between Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the Arabian Peninsula. And the Mediterranean, of course, was a bustling maritime neighborhood long before the Phoenicians, with obsidian from Melos and pottery from Crete found on distant shores. This reliance on water demanded and drove a crucial technological leap: boat building. The earliest known log boats or dugouts date back over 10,000 years. To hollow out a massive tree trunk with stone tools was a monumental investment of time and skill, a testament to how essential water transport had become. Later, people learned to lash reeds or timber together to make rafts, and eventually to stretch animal hides over wooden frames to create lightweight, versatile vessels. Mastering these crafts meant mastering geography. A community that could build a sturdy boat gained access to a network that spanned continents. They could transport their surplus grain to a downstream trading partner, return with coveted flint or copper from upstream mines, and establish alliances with communities hundreds of miles away without ever crossing a mountain pass. The growth of the first towns and proto-cities is almost always tied to these liquid highways. Settlements clustered at river confluences, at natural harbors, at the point where a navigable river met the sea. These were the prehistoric ports, the hubs where goods were transferred, stories were exchanged, and cultures blended. The river did not just feed the fields, it fed the community's connections to a wider world. So when we trace the spread of a new pottery style or the distribution of a particular type of axe, we must often look to the winding paths of rivers and the sheltered lanes along coasts. They were the silent, powerful engines of integration, turning local innovations into continental trends and weaving separate valleys into a single, interconnected story. While luxury goods traveled far, the true foundation of these networks was built on something far more ordinary. In the rolling chalk hills of northern Europe, communities were engaged in a different kind of excavation, one driven not by spiritual desire but by daily necessity. Here they sought flint and chert, the gritty, durable stone that was the steel of the Stone Age. From it, they crafted the essential tools of existence: knives for butchering game, scrapers for preparing hides, axes for felling trees, and arrowheads for hunting. The trade in this humble material reveals the robust, everyday economy that sustained prehistoric life, an organized system of extraction and distribution that operated with remarkable sophistication. The scale of this industry becomes breathtakingly clear at places like Grimes Graves in eastern England. This is not a simple surface quarry. It is a sprawling Neolithic landscape, pockmarked with over 400 deep shafts dug through layers of earth and chalk to reach the finest, jet-black flint seams below. Descending into one of these shafts is to step into an ancient world of engineering. Using nothing more than deer antlers as picks and shovels, and shoulder blades as scrapers, miners would dig tunnels radiating out from the base of the shaft, following the precious stone layer. The labor was immense, dangerous, and communal. It speaks to a society that could organize specialized workforces, plan long-term projects, and value a resource so highly that they would literally move mountains of earth to obtain it. The flint they pulled from the darkness was not for local use alone. It was a commodity. Hundreds of miles to the south, in the region of Grand Presigny in central France, another industrial hub flourished. Here, the material was a distinctive honey-colored chert of exceptional quality. The artisans of Grand Presigny mastered a technique to produce enormous, elegant blades, some over a foot long. These were not rough tools. They were masterworks of lithic technology, standardized and prized across Western Europe. The distribution map of Grand Presigny blades is a testament to their reach. They have been found in hoards and settlements across France, into Switzerland, Germany, and the Low Countries, sometimes over 500 kilometers from their source. This was not casual barter, this was systematic export. The movement of these utilitarian materials tells a story of established procurement and predictable exchange. Communities knew where to find the best stone. They developed relationships with the mining groups, likely trading grain, livestock, or other goods in return for pre-formed cores or finished blades. This created a reliable, substrate-level network of interdependence. A farmer on the North Sea coast might use an axe made from French chert, while a hunter in the Alps might carry arrowheads crafted from English flint. Their daily survival was literally tied to the smooth functioning of these long-distance connections. This trade in the ordinary made the trade in the extraordinary possible. The reliable flow of essential tools created stability. It built trust between distant groups and established the routes and social protocols of exchange. Once a pathway was known for moving flint, it became easier and safer to send a piece of rare amber or an exotic shell along that same corridor. The luxury trade was the glittering spire, but it rested on a deep, wide foundation of practical, economic necessity. The networks that carried jade and amber were not separate from those that carried flint. They were the same networks serving different human needs. One fed the body and the daily tasks of life. The other fed the spirit and the aspirations of culture. Together, they wove a social fabric strong enough to span a continent, proving that the first global economy was built as much on the reliable edge of an axe as it was on the captivating glow of a golden stone. A single bead from a Bronze Age burial holds a world within it. To understand the vast, invisible networks of the past, we must become detectives, learning to read the silent testimony of objects. This is where modern science meets ancient dust, using tools our ancestors could never have imagined to decode the journeys they took. One of the most powerful techniques in this toolkit is provenance analysis, the art of discovering where something came from. It begins with a fundamental question asked of every artifact: what are you made of? Every material on Earth has a unique chemical signature, a hidden fingerprint formed by the geology of its birthplace. Take that bead. By placing a tiny sample in an instrument called a mass spectrometer, scientists can vaporize it and measure the ratios of different elements and isotopes within. Strontium isotopes, for instance, vary from region to region based on the underlying bedrock. If the strontium signature in the bead's enamel matches the geology of a mountain range 500 miles away, we have our first clue. We know that person or the material that adorned them had a connection to that distant place. This method has traced obsidian to specific volcanoes, copper to particular mines, and amber to precise coastal regions, turning vague ideas of trade into precise maps of movement. But the story does not end with sourcing. Another brilliant technique, residue analysis, allows us to peer into the very contents of ancient containers. A seemingly empty clay pot buried for millennia is not truly empty. Microscopic traces of organic compounds, lipids from fats, oils, or resins seep into the ceramic and become trapped. In the lab, archaeologists can dissolve these residues and analyze them. They might find chemical markers for fermented honey, proving the vessel once held mead. They might detect traces of pine resin, indicating it was used to waterproof a wineskin or seal a jar. Most tellingly, they can sometimes identify compounds from plants or animals not native to the area. Finding residue of a tropical fruit in a pot in temperate Europe is a direct signal of exchange, telling us not just that goods moved, but what those goods actually were. It transforms a silent pot into a witness that whispers of forgotten meals, traded delicacies, and shared rituals. The final piece of the puzzle lies in patterns. Archaeologists are master pattern recognizers. They map the distribution of specific artifact types: a uniquely shaped axe, a style of pottery decoration, a particular type of bead. When these items appear in a tight cluster, it suggests local production. But when they fan out along river valleys or coastal routes, decreasing in frequency the farther you get from the source, you are likely looking at the archaeological footprint of a trade network. The sudden, dramatic appearance of an exotic material in a burial context is often the smoking gun. The most famous example is the vivid blue lapis lazuli found in the tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. This stunning stone comes from only one major source in the ancient world, the remote mountains of modern-day Afghanistan. For it to appear in the Valley of the Kings, it had to travel over 2,500 miles, crossing deserts, mountains, and multiple cultural zones. Its presence is irrefutable proof of a long-distance exchange system so robust and reliable that an Egyptian king could count on its delivery for his journey to the afterlife. These methods, provenance, residue analysis, and distribution mapping, are how we move from speculation to evidence-based narrative. The story of prehistoric trade is not a fantasy. It is a meticulous reconstruction, a tale written in the chemistry of stone, the residues in clay, and the geographic spread of a common bead. Each analysis is like recovering a single line from a lost epic. When we put them all together, we begin to hear the poem of an interconnected world, a story of human curiosity and connection written long before the first history book was ever conceived. A Mesopotamian seal and an Indus Valley pot can tell the same story without a single shared word. As objects traveled, so did the images upon them. This cultural convergence is perhaps the most compelling evidence that these networks moved more than cargo, they moved consciousness. When we see the same symbolic language appearing across vast distances, we are witnessing the exchange of worldviews, the slow blending of myth and meaning that turned separate cultures into a conversation. One of the most powerful and widespread of these shared motifs is the figure known as the Master of Animals. This iconic image depicts a central, often heroic figure, sometimes human, sometimes divine, grasping two powerful beasts, one in each hand. We find it etched into Mesopotamian cylinder seals from the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, a symbol of royal power over the chaotic forces of nature. Centuries later and thousands of miles to the east, a strikingly similar figure appears in the art of the Indus Valley civilization, a humanoid form grappling with tigers. And it journeys west too, appearing in Minoan Crete on carved seal stones, where a goddess or a male figure subdues creatures of the wild. This was not a case of independent invention. The specific composition, the posture, the very idea of a central authority taming nature's raw power, traveled along the same routes as Lapis Lazuli and carnelian beads. It was an idea whose time had come, and the trade networks were its medium. Serpent imagery provides another thread in this woven tapestry of belief. In many cultures, the snake represented regeneration, wisdom, or chthonic power. But the specific ways these creatures were depicted began to show fascinating parallels. The coiling, intertwined serpents found in Mesopotamian art find echoes in the designs of the Indus Valley and later in the iconography of the Aegean. Certain geometric patterns like the stepped pyramid or meander design also began a continental migration. These were more than decorations, they were likely sacred symbols, protective emblems, or cosmological maps. Their spread tells us that with every trader's pack or diplomatic gift came a bundle of cultural code. A merchant might explain the protective power of a certain symbol to a trading partner, who then asked a local artisan to incorporate it. Over generations, these borrowed ideas were adapted, blended with local traditions, and made new. This process created a kind of prehistoric international style, a visual lingua franca understood from the Euphrates to the Indus. It suggests periods of sustained, peaceful contact deep enough for artisans to learn from one another, for priests to discuss the nature of the divine, and for stories to be told and retold until their origins blurred. The trade in spices or textiles created temporary economic links, but the trade in symbols forged lasting cultural bonds. When a community adopts an artistic motif from a distant land, they are not just admiring its beauty. They are acknowledging a connection, integrating a piece of a foreign worldview into their own. This convergence reveals a profound truth about our ancient past. Long before empires enforced cultural unity, a quieter, more organic process was at work. Through countless acts of exchange, a shared reservoir of images and ideas was slowly filling, creating the common symbolic ground from which later civilizations would draw. The goods sustained the body, but these shared symbols nourished the shared imagination of a continent. that shared symbolic language required a shared material reality. To carve a master of animal seal or cast a ritual dagger, you needed more than flint or stone. You needed the metal that defined an age. Deep in a Bronze Age workshop, the air would have shimmered with heat and anticipation. The alchemist's crucible held two unassuming ores, dull, reddish copper and a curious silvery gray stone called cassiterite, the source of tin. Separately, they were soft and limited. But combined in the fire, they underwent a transformation, flowing together to create an alloy of golden strength bronze. This was the cosmic metal, a material so superior it reshaped warfare, agriculture, and art. Yet its creation depended on a logistical puzzle of continental scale. While copper deposits were found in many regions, from Cyprus to the Alps, tin was a geological ghost. It was exceedingly rare, concentrated in only a handful of places on Earth. Major sources likely existed in Cornwall at the southwestern tip of Britain, in the Erzgebirge Mountains of Central Europe, and in the remote highlands of Central Asia and Afghanistan. This scarcity made tin the ultimate strategic resource. The great bronze-working civilizations, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Hittites in Anatolia, the dynasties of early China, did not possess this crucial ingredient within their own borders. Their entire technological supremacy depended on acquiring it from afar. This necessity forged interdependencies that stretched across the known world. We must trace the hypothetical routes of this invisible trade. From the misty tin streams of Cornwall, the metal likely began a long journey east. It could have moved across the English Channel to the European mainland, traveling down the river systems like the Rhine, or perhaps coast-hugging by boat to the Mediterranean. Here, it would enter the vibrant maritime networks of the Minoans and Mycenaeans, who acted as middlemen, funneling it toward the wealthy city-states of the Levant and Mesopotamia. Another artery may have pulsed from the Afghan highlands, where tin from places like Badakhshan joined the flow of Lapis Lazuli. This eastern tin would have moved west along the same mountain tracks and desert oases that carried other luxuries, eventually reaching the workshops of Sumer and Akkad. Meanwhile, in East Asia, the Shang dynasty's magnificent bronze vessels used to communicate with ancestors required their own tin sources. These may have come from deposits in Yunnan to the southwest, or through contacts with Central Asian steppe cultures who had access to the eastern tin mountains. Securing this critical resource was not a simple matter of commerce. It drove exploration and dictated geopolitical strategy. A kingdom's power was now measured not just by its army, but by its access to distant tin suppliers. This forced the creation of stable diplomatic and commercial relationships over staggering distances. Alliances were brokered, royal marriages arranged, and protected trade corridors established, all to ensure the steady, life-giving flow of that silvery gray ore. The Bronze Age world was held together by this fragile, essential thread. The trade in tin was the engine of early globalization, proving that necessity, not just luxury, could weave a network that spanned from the Atlantic shores to the Yellow River. The quest for tin and bronze reveals a world bound by necessity, but another ancient endeavor speaks to a deeper, more unifying human impulse. Across the rolling green landscapes of Europe, along the coasts of the Mediterranean, and into the rugged highlands of the Caucasus, communities embarked on projects of staggering ambition. They moved mountains not for ore but for meaning. The great stone circles, passage tombs, and standing alignments that dot the continent are not isolated wonders. They are the ultimate testament to a shared vision, and their construction hints at a network of knowledge that flowed as freely as any trade good. Take the iconic blue stones of Stonehenge. Geological analysis confirms that dozens of these distinctive spotted dolerite pillars were quarried from the Preseli Hills in West Wales, a journey of over 240 kilometers to the Salisbury Plain in southern England. In an age without the wheel or draft animals, this was a logistical feat bordering on the miraculous. The stones, each weighing multiple tons, were likely transported part of the way by water, rafted along rivers and coastal waters, and then dragged overland on timber sledges. This was not a haphazard effort. It required precise planning, a vast coordinated labor force, and an unshakable communal purpose. The same story echoes at Newgrange in Ireland, a massive passage tomb older than the pyramids. Its facade is studded with white quartz cobbles and granite boulders gathered from coasts and mountains over 50 kilometers away. To bring these stones to the site, to engineer a structure that captures the winter solstice sunrise with such accuracy, implies more than local ingenuity. It suggests the circulation of specialized knowledge. Could the architects who understood solar alignments and corbelled vaulting have been a kind of itinerant elite, their skills requested and shared between distant communities? The evidence points to a connected megalithic culture, from the dolmens of the Caucasus to the alignments of Karnak in Brittany. Similar architectural forms and ceremonial concepts appear across vast distances. The core idea of using immense, permanent stone to mark the landscape, honor ancestors, and track celestial cycles seems to have spread along the same coastal and riverine highways used for trade. The movement of the stones themselves may have been part of the ritual, the act of a community traveling to a distant, sacred source, enduring the hardship of the journey, and returning with a piece of that sacred geography, would have imbued each monolith with profound power and story. Its origin was as important as its final placement. This was trade of a different order. It was an exchange of spiritual capital and collective identity. The shared effort to raise these monuments created social bonds that transcended kinship or territory. It required a society organized enough to feed and manage large workforces, and confident enough in its beliefs to invest generations of labor into a single, eternal statement. The stone circles and tombs were not just local religious sites, they were nodes in a continent-wide conversation about time, memory, and humanity's place in the cosmos. The materials were heavy, but the ideas they carried were weightless, traveling from mind to mind and inspiring people across Europe to look to the sky and to each other to build something greater than themselves. The deep blue of Lapis Lazuli was a color like no other in the ancient world. It did not mimic the sky or the sea. It seemed to hold the night itself, speckled with the golden dust of distant stars. This stone had a single, legendary source, hidden in the remote, rugged mountains of what is now Afghanistan, at a place called Sar-e-Sang. For over 6,000 years, miners carved into those dizzying cliffs to extract the only true lapis lazuli known to the great civilizations. Its journey from that isolated valley to the workshops of kings is one of the most extraordinary tales of prehistoric trade. To possess this stone was to hold a piece of the cosmic vault, a direct link to the divine. It was never a common commodity. Lapis was reserved for the highest expressions of power and belief, meticulously carved into seals for Mesopotamian royalty, ground into the sacred eye paint of Egyptian priests, and inlaid into the ceremonial ornaments of the Indus Valley elite. Its ultimate expression is perhaps the golden death mask of Tutankhamun, where the dark blue lapis forms the stripes of his Nemes headcloth and the inlays of his eyes, connecting the young pharaoh eternally to the heavens. The stone's path was as arduous as its color was deep. From the Afghan highlands, it likely traveled west through the Iranian plateau, down to the great cities of Mesopotamia like Ur and Babylon. From there, it could move by caravan across the Sinai to Egypt, or by ship through the Persian Gulf and up the Red Sea. Each handoff, through middlemen and across cultural borders, multiplied its mystique and its cost. This was not trade driven by practical need, but by a profound desire for the sacred and the singular. Contrast this deep celestial blue with the vibrant, life-affirming green blue of turquoise. This stone had its own sacred sources, like the sun-scorched mines of the Sinai Peninsula or the mountains of Persia. For the Egyptians, turquoise was the color of joy and resurrection, strongly associated with Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty. They mined it themselves in the Sinai, but also prized the Persian varieties that arrived through exchange. In the Americas, though separate from these Eurasian networks, cultures like the ancestral Puebloans held turquoise in similar reverence, a stone of water and sky in an arid land. Both lapis and turquoise operated within what scholars call a prestige economy. Their value was not intrinsic but socially constructed. It was amplified by every mile traveled, every frontier crossed, every story told of their mythical origins. The more distant and difficult the source, the more potent the stone became as a symbol. A ruler adorned with lapis from a fabled mountain at the edge of the world was not just wealthy, he was cosmically connected. His authority was literally forged from the fabric of the universe, sourced from lands so remote they were almost abstract. This demand created supply chains of breathtaking complexity and resilience. They required trust between miners, caravan leaders, river transporters, and royal stewards. They required diplomatic agreements to ensure safe passage through dozens of territories. They required a shared understanding across languages and cultures that this particular shade of blue was worth more than its weight in gold. The silent movement of these vivid stones proves that the most powerful forces in early globalization were often the most beautiful. They were not traded to fill a stomach or build a wall, but to feed a soul, crown a king, and honor a god. In seeking the color of heaven and the hue of life, our ancestors built the very roads that would one day carry the world's weight. The Sahara was not always a sea of sand. 6,000 years ago, this vast expanse was a greener, wetter world, a mosaic of grasslands, lakes, and flowing rivers. Herders moved with their cattle across a landscape that would later become one of the most formidable deserts on Earth. This was not a barrier, but a bridge. These lush corridors allowed communities to traverse the continent, exchanging goods and ideas between the Mediterranean coast and the deep interior of Africa. But the climate was shifting. Slowly, over centuries, the rains failed, the lakes shrank, and the grasslands retreated. The Great Green Bridge began to close. As the desert asserted itself, those ancient pathways of movement were choked off, forcing human activity to consolidate along the remaining ribbons of life, the Nile River Valley and the coastal Levant. Trade did not disappear, it was redirected and intensified along these narrow, fertile strips, helping to catalyze the rise of the great Egyptian and Near Eastern civilizations. This story of the Sahara is a powerful lesson. The prehistoric trade networks we have traced were not static lines etched permanently into the earth. They were dynamic, living systems, constantly reshaped by the most powerful force of all, a changing planet. The opening and closing of ecological corridors dictated where people could go, what they could carry, and who they could meet. During warmer, wetter periods, the great belt of the Eurasian steppe expanded, its grasslands providing a superhighway for pastoralists and their goods. Conversely, when conditions turned colder or drier, these corridors constricted, pushing populations into closer contact, sometimes fostering conflict, but also accelerating the exchange of technologies and ideas in these crowded refuges. The retreat of the glaciers at the end of the last ice age unlocked another set of corridors, the sea. As sea levels rose, they flooded coastal plains but also created new maritime passages. The Persian Gulf, once a dry river valley, filled with water, becoming a liquid highway between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. The Mediterranean became more navigable, its islands now stepping stones for explorers and traders. On the other side of the world, the drying of the Arabian interior provides a clear example of this environmental push. As the deserts grew more inhospitable, the overland routes for transporting precious goods like frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia became perilous. This environmental pressure likely helped push this lucrative trade onto the water, giving rise to the famed incense route, a maritime network that sailed along the coast of the Arabian Sea, connecting the Horn of Africa with the civilizations of the Levant and Egypt. The boats were safer and could carry far greater cargo than camel caravans across the dunes. To understand these ancient networks, we must see them not as fixed commercial routes, but as pulses of human movement flowing through the landscape, seeking the path of least resistance. They followed the rivers during drought, climbed to high pastures during heat, and took to the sea when the land failed. Each shift in climate, each opening of a green valley or closing of a mountain pass, wrote a new chapter in the story of human connection. The goods changed, the people changed, but the imperative to connect, to find a way through, remained constant. Our ancestors were not just trading with each other, they were negotiating with the earth itself, and their greatest networks were a testament to that enduring dialogue. A word can be a fossil, preserving the shape of an ancient exchange long after the object itself has turned to dust. Listen closely to the reconstructed roots of our oldest languages, and you might hear the faint but distinct echo of a trade negotiation. Scholars of linguistic archaeology trace words for revolutionary technologies as they leap from one language family to another, following the same paths as the goods they named. Take the word for copper. In the ancient Near East, the Sumerian word yorudu seems to have traveled. It appears in early Indo-European languages as something like roundhose, giving us the English red and the Latin rubeus, all pointing to the distinctive reddish hue of the metal. This is not a coincidence. It suggests that the material and its name arrived together, a packaged deal of innovation and vocabulary. The same pattern appears with the wheel, a technology whose terminology spreads in a radiating wave from its likely point of origin. These shared words are like linguistic trade beads strung along the routes of human contact. The field of proto-linguistics attempts to rebuild these ancestral mother tongues, languages like Proto-Indo-European, spoken thousands of years before writing. By comparing words across descendant languages, from English and Greek to Sanskrit, linguists can reconstruct a root word and its meaning. When they find a root word for a specific technology that is widely shared, it strongly suggests that technology was known to the original speakers. More intriguingly, when a word for something like axle or yoke appears to be borrowed from a neighboring language family, it becomes a clue to a moment of cultural handshake. It implies that one group learned not just how to build a cart from another, but also what to call its parts. This borrowing is a signature of sustained, peaceful contact deep enough for everyday conversation between artisans and traders. This approach is not without its controversies. Words can be tricky, changing sound and meaning over millennia, and similarities can sometimes be deceptive. Yet the consistent patterns are compelling. The movement of terms for metals, wheeled vehicles, and textiles often maps neatly onto the archaeological evidence for trade routes. For instance, words related to wool and weaving show fascinating overlaps between early Indo-European and Semitic language families, hinting at exchanges between the pastoralists of the steppe and the settled cultures of the Near East. This was not just a swap of goods, it was a subtle, profound integration of worldviews where adopting a new word was the first step in adopting a new concept. These linguistic whispers offer a unique dimension to our understanding of prehistoric networks. While potsherds and stone tools show us that objects moved, shared vocabulary suggests people were talking to each other, explaining, teaching, and learning. The trade networks did more than transport amber and jade. They acted as a slow, vast communication system, facilitating a dialogue that shaped the very foundations of languages spoken by billions today. In this silent exchange of syllables, we find the earliest roots of our shared human story, a narrative written not in stone but in the enduring currency of speech. But the most vital material in these ancient exchanges had no color at all. It was a simple, crystalline substance, white as bone and essential to life itself. Salt. In a world without refrigeration, salt was not a seasoning, it was survival. It preserved meat and fish through long winters. It was crucial for human health, and it became a form of wealth so universal it was often called white gold. The hunger for it carved trade routes deep into the continents, creating economic arteries that pulsed with activity for millennia. One of the earliest and most famous sources lies in the Austrian Alps at a place called Hallstatt. Here, over 3,000 years ago, a sophisticated salt mining operation was already in full swing. Miners used bronze picks to tunnel into the mountain, extracting the precious mineral from deep seams. The community that grew around this industry was wealthy and well-connected, its graves filled with imported bronze and amber, proof that salt was their ticket into the vast Eurasian exchange network. They likely traded standardized bricks or cakes of salt, a consistent commodity that could be easily transported and valued. Similar scenes played out across the world. In China, ancient texts describe the management of salt pans along the coast, where seawater was evaporated to yield the precious crystals. Inland, brine springs were exploited with elaborate bamboo piping systems. This was not casual collection, it was organized state-level production. The movement of this heavy, essential good required infrastructure, giving rise to the first salt roads. These were well-trodden paths, often following river valleys, where caravans of people or pack animals would carry their white gold from the source regions to populations far inland who had no access to it. Because everyone needed it, salt became a powerful economic and social lever. Historians suggest it was one of the earliest forms of proto-currency, used to pay soldiers, giving us the word salary, and to facilitate market trade. Control of a salt source meant control over life and commerce, allowing emerging elites to consolidate power and create dependencies. A coastal kingdom could trade salt for grain from an agricultural heartland, binding the two regions in a cycle of mutual need. This trade in salt created a different kind of network, one based on stark necessity rather than spiritual desire or technological ambition. It connected the shepherd in the mountains to the fisherman on the coast, the farmer on the plains to the miner in the hills. While jade adorned kings and amber held sunlight, salt sustained the common body and greased the wheels of daily economy. Its silent, ubiquitous trade wove a fundamental layer of practical interconnection beneath the glittering exchanges of luxuries, proving that the most basic human needs could build roads just as enduring as those forged by aspiration. The silent trade in salt connected continents through necessity, but could these networks have reached even further? Our story has centered on Eurasia, a landmass intricately woven by ancient pathways. Yet the human impulse to explore and exchange hints at a world even more connected than we once believed. Scattered, controversial finds suggest our ancestors' reach may have occasionally brushed against shores we consider separate worlds. These are not the clear, mapped routes of the Amber Road, but tantalizing whispers that challenge a strictly isolated view of prehistory. One of the most debated pieces of evidence comes from the tombs of the pharaohs. In the 1990s, chemical analyses of several Egyptian mummies, including the famed Ramesses II, reportedly detected traces of nicotine and cocaine, substances native only to the Americas. The scientific community remains deeply divided on these findings, with many experts suggesting possible contamination or errors in testing. The mainstream archaeological consensus firmly holds there is no conclusive proof of direct, sustained contact between ancient Egypt and the Americas. Yet for a moment, let us sit with the sheer intrigue of the idea. If such traces were ever validated, they would not imply Egyptian galleys crossing the Atlantic. A more plausible scenario within the framework of the vast networks we have already traced would be a slow, multi-stage relay. Imagine a rare commodity, a medicinal plant or a curious resin, moving from hand to hand along trade chains spanning Asia. Could it have eventually, through countless intermediaries over centuries, traversed the Bering Land Bridge when it was still passable, or even made a short, accidental maritime hop? The existence of those robust, continent-spanning Eurasian networks makes the concept of an object completing a millennia-long journey slightly less fantastical. It becomes a question of extraordinary chance, not impossibility. This line of thinking extends to the vast Pacific. The sweet potato, a crop domesticated in South America, was present across Polynesia long before European contact. While some argue seeds could have floated on currents, many scholars now accept that Polynesian voyagers, the greatest navigators in human history, likely reached South America and returned with this vital plant. This was not a trade network in the Eurasian sense, but a stunning feat of exploration that resulted in a profound biological exchange. It proves that ocean basins were not absolute barriers to the determined and the skilled. These glimpses do not rewrite history books, but they expand our imagination. They encourage us to view prehistory not as a time of isolated cultures developing in vacuum, but as an age of surprising mobility and relentless curiosity. The wind, the current, and the simple human desire to see what lies beyond the next horizon could have created threads of connection far thinner and more fragile than the amber or jade routes, threads that have largely vanished from the archaeological record. What they leave us with is a humbling possibility. The interconnected world we live in today may not be a modern invention, but the flowering of a very old, very deep human tendency. Our ancestors were always looking for a way to reach the other side, to share what they had, and to discover what they did not. Sometimes they may have succeeded in ways we are only beginning to sense. The flow of goods did more than connect villages, it reshaped their very foundations. For thousands of years, many societies operated on a relatively equal footing, where leadership was fluid and wealth was shared. But the emergence of long-distance trade introduced a new and powerful variable into this social equation: controlled scarcity. When a rare and desirable material begins to move through a landscape, it creates bottlenecks, points of leverage that ambitious individuals could learn to master. Think of a river valley that served as the only safe pass through a mountain range, a place where all jade from the highlands had to travel. The family or clan that controlled that valley held incredible power. They could demand a portion of the precious stone as a toll for safe passage. They could become the exclusive brokers, deciding who received the jade and on what terms. This was no longer about participating in a network. It was about controlling a critical node within it. This control over access translated directly into social capital. The individual who could reliably provide exotic goods, Baltic amber, Aegean Spondylus shells, Afghan Lapis Lazuli, gained immense prestige. These items were not just beautiful, they were stories made solid, proof of a connection to distant, powerful worlds. By redistributing these treasures, a leader could create obligations. They could gift a fine obsidian dagger to a loyal follower, or present a string of exotic shells during a marriage ceremony, weaving a web of debt and loyalty. Over time, this economic advantage hardened into political authority. What began as a respected mediator in trade disputes could evolve into a recognized chieftain, whose word carried weight because his wealth and connections supported it. Archaeology reveals this transformation in the changing patterns of burial. In earlier, more egalitarian times, grave goods were simple and similar. But as trade networks intensified, we begin to see dramatic differences. In one resting place, an individual might be buried with nothing but a simple pot. In another, just a few hundred meters away, a person is laid to rest with a wealth of imported goods, a necklace of amber beads, a bronze dagger, and polished jade rings. This is not a reflection of personal skill alone. It is the marker of a new social reality, where access to long-distance exchange networks created a permanent divide between those who had connections and those who did not. These were the first chiefdoms, societies where rank was inherited and power was consolidated around the control of resources and ritual. The trade networks, therefore, were not passive highways. They were active agents of change, forging the very tools of inequality. The desire for a piece of the distant and the divine created opportunities for accumulation and control that simply did not exist before. This shift laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The administrative systems needed to manage complex trade, the warriors employed to protect it, and the religious ideologies that sanctified the ruler's exclusive access to heaven's stones. All these features of early civilization have their roots in the simple, powerful act of controlling a path through the mountains. The connections that brought continents together also began to pull societies apart, creating hierarchies that would define human history for millennia to come. The most valuable cloak in the ancient world began its life not on a loom, but in the depths of the sea. To create a single gram of true Tyrian purple dye required the careful harvesting and processing of thousands of murex shellfish. The labor was immense, the smell was famously foul, and the result was a color of such depth and richness that it became synonymous with royalty and divine authority across the Mediterranean and Near East. While stone tools and metal ingots survived the ages, the other great engine of prehistoric trade has largely vanished. Textiles are fragile, returning to dust. Yet the story of fabrics and dyes is written everywhere in the indirect evidence they left behind, telling a tale of a vast, sophisticated organic network that clothed empires and carried identity across continents. In the ruins of workshops, we find the humble tools of this invisible industry. Loom weights made of clay or stone hint at the scale of production. A cluster of heavy weights suggests a large, vertical loom capable of producing wide bolts of cloth. Spindle whorls, used to spin raw fibers into thread, are found from the steppes of Central Asia to the lake villages of Switzerland, their designs varying from region to region like a signature. The discovery of vats stained with specific minerals or surrounded by crushed insect shells points to dedicated dyeing facilities. These are the silent footprints of a massive economic sector. The raw materials for this trade came from the living world: wool from the sheep bred across Eurasia, flax for linen from the fertile river valleys, and later, the almost mythical softness of silk from the Far East. But it was the dyes that transformed simple cloth into a canvas of power and prestige. Beyond the legendary murex purple, there was crimson from the tiny kermes insect, harvested from oak trees in the Mediterranean. There was vibrant red from the madder root and the distinctive blue from woad, a plant cultivated across Europe. Each color had its own geography, its own complex production process, and its own cultural meaning. A cloak dyed with genuine Tyrian purple was not just a garment, it was a walking proclamation of immense wealth and connection. The exchange of these textiles and dyes reveals a pivotal shift in human society. This was trade moving decisively beyond the realm of subsistence and ritual necessity into an economy of aesthetic value and social signaling. A finely woven, brightly colored textile was lightweight, durable, and carried an enormous value-to-weight ratio, making it the perfect long-distance commodity. It could be folded, packed, and transported in bulk. A trader's sack could hold a fortune in cloth, representing years of skilled labor from the shepherding and shearing to the spinning, weaving, and the secretive, smelly alchemy of the dye vat. When such a textile traveled, it carried more than warmth or beauty. It carried a complete cultural package. The patterns woven into the fabric, the way a tunic was fastened, the specific combination of colors, all spoke of a particular people, a specific social rank, or a religious affiliation. A chieftain on the European steppe wearing a tunic edged with Mediterranean purple was making a statement as clear as any written treaty. He was declaring his participation in a network that spanned the known world, his ability to command the labor of countless hands, and his access to the most exclusive symbols of status. The knowledge traveled with the goods, the intricate weaving techniques, the complex dye recipes, and the very styles of clothing moved along these organic networks, passed from artisan to artisan. The trade in textiles was, in essence, a trade in identity itself, weaving the disparate threads of ancient Eurasia into a tapestry of shared aesthetic and economic endeavor, long before the first silk cocoon began its journey west. The exchange of a sacred shell was an act of diplomacy with the divine. To view these early networks through a purely economic lens is to miss their beating heart. For countless communities, the movement of precious objects was not commerce, it was ceremony. A trade encounter was a ritual, a carefully choreographed event where oaths were sworn, feasts were shared, and symbolic gifts were exchanged to forge bonds that were as much spiritual as they were social. These acts of reciprocity were the sacred glue that held the network together, transforming strangers into allies and a simple transaction into a covenant. Anthropology offers us a powerful window into this mindset through traditions that survived into the modern era, like the famed Kula Ring of the Pacific Islands. In this elaborate system, men undertake perilous ocean voyages in outrigger canoes not to trade for profit, but to exchange two types of ceremonial valuables: white shell armbands that move clockwise around the island circle, and red shell necklaces that travel counterclockwise. The objects themselves have no practical use. Their immense value lies solely in their history, their fame, and the personal relationships they embody. To give a Kula valuable is to give a piece of your own reputation, creating a lasting partnership of mutual obligation and honor that lasts for generations. This is trade as a sacred social circuit. While we have no written records of a prehistoric Eurasian Kula, the archaeological evidence whispers of similar principles. Why were such staggering quantities of exotic wealth, Baltic amber, Afghan lapis, Chinese jade, deliberately taken out of circulation and placed in the earth? The rich hoards buried across Europe and the lavish goods interred with individuals are often interpreted as displays of power, and they were. But they may also be the final act in a sacred cycle of exchange. By depositing these powerful, network-borne objects into a burial mound or a watery pit, communities were not just hiding wealth or honoring the departed. They might have been making an offering to the ancestors or to the gods themselves, completing a circuit. The object, charged with social energy and distant magic, was returned to the earth, maintaining the cosmic balance and ensuring the fertility, safety, and continuity of the community and the network that sustained it. The movement of goods maintained a spiritual and social order far beyond material need. A gift of obsidian from a volcanic mountain was not just a tool, it was a piece of that mountain's power. A necklace of Mediterranean shells worn in Central Europe was a tangible connection to the life-giving sea. Each exchange reinforced a worldview where humans, the landscape, and the unseen world were intertwined in a web of mutual obligation. The trader was not a merchant but a diplomat and a priest carrying objects that were alive with meaning. The feast that sealed the deal, the oaths sworn over shared drink, the ceremonial presentation of gifts, these rituals transformed economic necessity into sacred trust. This perspective changes everything. It means the Amber Road and the Jade Path were not just supply chains, they were pilgrimage routes for objects. The value was created not by scarcity alone, but by the stories woven around each piece during its long journey, and by the sacred bonds its exchange could create between people and the world they believed in. That sacred circuit of exchange was not unbreakable. The networks that wove the ancient world together were resilient, but they were not immune to the immense forces of a changing planet. A single, sustained drought could unravel threads of connection that had taken centuries to spin. Picture a community that has prospered for generations as a vital hub along a jade route. Their wealth and identity are built on the steady flow of people and goods. Then the rains fail. The springs that once watered travelers and their pack animals dry up. The grasslands that fed herds wither into dust. The once busy path falls silent. The exotic shells and stones stop arriving. The artisans who depended on imported materials find their workshops empty. Within a few years, a thriving node in a continental network becomes an isolated village, struggling to remember the wider world it once knew. This was not a rare nightmare, but a recurring reality of prehistoric life. One of the most profound of these disruptions is known to scholars as the 4.2 kiloyear event. Around 4,200 years ago, a period of severe aridification gripped vast regions from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley. Tree rings and lake sediments tell a story of decades, perhaps even centuries, of punishing drought. Its effects rippled across the connected world. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire, one of history's first great empires, fragmented. Its agricultural heartland could no longer support its cities. In the Indus Valley, the meticulously planned cities of the Harappan civilization, with their advanced water management systems, were gradually abandoned as the rivers that sustained them shifted and dwindled. The elegant standardization of weights and measures, so crucial for long-distance trade, began to fade. The Aegean world also entered a period of decline and population movement. It was as if a great, invisible hand had squeezed the continents, and the networks that pulsed between civilizations grew faint. But this is not just a story of endings. It is a story of adaptation and stubborn memory. When a primary route collapsed, the knowledge of connection did not simply vanish. It retreated into the cultural landscape, preserved in stories, in the heirloom objects passed down through generations, and in the collective understanding that other peoples and other resources existed beyond the horizon. Trade did not cease, it transformed. It became more localized, more opportunistic, and often more dangerous, but the impulse to exchange persisted. The collapse of a major node, like the great Indus cities, did not erase the concept of long-distance trade. It forced a dramatic reorganization. The centralized, city-based networks gave way to more flexible, decentralized systems, often managed by the mobile pastoralists of the steppes and deserts who were better equipped to navigate a harsher world. The goods still moved, just along different, less formalized trails. This cycle of collapse and reformation reveals the true nature of these early webs. They were not rigid infrastructures, but living, breathing patterns of human behavior. They could be damaged, fragmented, and driven underground, but the fundamental human drive to connect, to seek out what others have, and to share what you possess proved incredibly durable. A route might lie dormant for centuries, remembered only in myth, until a shift in climate, a new technology, or a period of stability made it viable once more. The pathways were etched not just in the dirt, but in the human mind. When conditions allowed, the memory would stir, a new generation would venture out, and the ancient dialogue between distant valleys would begin again, whispering the same timeless question: what do you have to trade? The stories of those ancient journeys did not vanish with the traders who made them. They lingered, transformed by memory and imagination, becoming the myths and legends that shaped entire cultures. Long before historians wrote of amber roads and jade paths, poets and storytellers were already singing of epic quests for impossible treasures in lands beyond the horizon. These are not literal records, but they are powerful echoes, a cultural memory of connection preserved in the language of wonder. Consider one of the oldest adventure tales from the Western canon, the Greek myth of Jason and the Argonauts. Their goal was not a kingdom or a princess, but a single magical object, the Golden Fleece. The story sends a crew of heroes across the treacherous Black Sea to the distant kingdom of Colchis in the Caucasus Mountains. This is not a random setting. The Caucasus region was, in reality, one of the ancient world's richest sources of gold. Local prospectors used sheepskins to trap gold dust from mountain streams, a technique still visible in some areas today. To the Greeks, hearing tales from traders who ventured to those distant shores, the land of Colchis could easily have been imagined as a place where gold itself was harvested from magical rams. The quest for the fleece, then, may preserve a poetic memory of the perilous, real journeys made for that most coveted of metals, transforming merchant sailors into epic heroes. Far to the east, another set of ancient texts holds similar clues. The Hebrew Bible speaks of a mysterious, fabulously wealthy land called Ophir. King Solomon is said to have sent his ships there, returning with vast quantities of gold, silver, precious woods, and gems. The actual location of Ophir has been debated for millennia, with suggestions ranging from southern Arabia to the coast of India or even Africa. What is significant is not pinpointing it on a map, but understanding what it represents in the story. Ophir is the ultimate there, a place so distant and rich it exists at the very edge of the known world. Its description is a catalogue of exotic trade goods that would have been the pinnacle of luxury in the ancient Near East: almug wood, ivory, apes, and peacocks. The legend of Solomon's fleet to Ophir likely encapsulates generations of knowledge about long-distance maritime trade routes down the Red Sea and across the Indian Ocean. It is a myth that celebrates the rewards of reaching beyond your own shores, of the wealth and wonder that flow from daring to connect with the utterly foreign. These stories served a profound purpose. They took the real, grinding hardship of the trade route, the years away from home, the dangers of storms and bandits, the uncertainty of the return, and gave it meaning. They turned the merchant, often a pragmatic figure, into a questing hero. They transformed the source of Lapis Lazuli or tin into a mythical realm guarded by dragons or gods. This was how ancient societies made sense of their interconnected world. The pathways that carried goods also carried tales, and over centuries, those tales became the bedrock of identity. A culture that told stories of heroes fetching treasures from the ends of the earth was a culture that knew, deep in its bones, that it was part of something vast. The myths were the maps of a shared human experience, written not on clay or stone, but in the collective imagination. They remind us that our oldest stories are often about the same thing: the courage to journey into the unknown and the transformative power of what we bring back. The true shape of this ancient world only emerges when we lay all the maps on top of one another. Today, researchers use digital tools to visualize these overlapping journeys, plotting the find spots of obsidian, jade, amber, and tin onto a single glowing screen. What appears is not a collection of separate lines, but a shimmering, dense web of connections spanning the entire continent. By the late Neolithic and into the Bronze Age, these were not isolated strands. They had woven themselves into an integrated, if wonderfully loose, system. A community in the Caucasus might receive amber from the north, tin from the east, and obsidian from the south, all converging in a single valley. This was not a coincidence of geography. It was the architecture of a connected age. Certain regions consistently appear at the bright intersections of this digital map, acting as the crucial hubs of the prehistoric world. The Caucasus Mountains were one such nexus, a bridge between the steppes and the settled civilizations to the south. The Indus Valley was another, its cities receiving lapis from Afghanistan, carnelian from Gujarat, and copper from distant hills, processing and sending finished goods back out along maritime and overland routes. These hubs were the great switching stations of the ancient network. They did not just pass goods along, they added value, blending ideas, repackaging materials, and redirecting the flow. This dense interconnection had a profound consequence. It meant that an innovation born in one corner of Eurasia could, given enough time, ripple across the entire continent. The concept of the wheel, perfected in one region, could travel along these established pathways of trust and exchange until it was adapted by cultures thousands of miles apart. A new alloy formula, a more efficient weaving technique, or a powerful symbol could diffuse through the network like a slow, steady pulse. This created something remarkable, a shared technological and cultural toolkit that defined the Bronze Age. From the Atlantic to the Yellow Sea, societies were increasingly working with similar materials, bronze, wool, wheeled vehicles, and grappling with similar social problems of how to manage the wealth and inequality these networks produced. They were not copies of each other, but participants in a vast, ongoing conversation. The movement of a tin ingot was not just a commercial transaction. It was a packet of potential, carrying with it the knowledge of metallurgy, the demand for new tools, and the social changes that came with them. When we see this synthesized web, we understand that the acceleration of cultural development in this period was not an accident. It was the direct result of this continental dialogue. A discovery did not have to be reinvented 100 times in 100 isolated valleys. It could travel, be improved upon, and inspire new ideas elsewhere. The network itself became an engine of progress, a collective brain for humankind, where the knowledge of many was slowly becoming the heritage of all. The silent trade in stones and shells had built something far greater than a series of economic routes. It had built the first prototype of a shared world. That integrated web of the Bronze Age was the true foundation. When we finally arrive at the era of the famed Silk Road, beginning around the 2nd century before the Common Era, we are not witnessing a sudden invention. We are seeing a familiar system reach its full, magnificent potential. The Silk Road did not blaze new trails across a blank map. It traveled along ancient, well-worn grooves in the earth, grooves first carved by the footsteps of Obsidian traders, jade porters, and amber-bearing nomads thousands of years earlier. The corridors were the same, the great grassy highway of the Eurasian steppe, the mountain passes of the Pamirs and the Caucasus, the life-giving river valleys of the Indus and the Tarim Basin. These were the continent's enduring arteries. The difference was not the path, but the traffic upon it. The prehistoric networks were like a series of quiet country lanes, with goods moving in a patient, intermittent relay. The Silk Road was that same landscape transformed into a bustling, multi-lane superhighway. The scale and intensity were unprecedented. Caravans now numbered in the hundreds of camels, carrying vast quantities of silk, spices, glass, and paper. The volume of exchange exploded, and with it, the speed of cultural transmission. What fundamentally changed was the political landscape. The prehistoric networks operated in a world of chiefdoms, villages, and mobile pastoralists. The Silk Road flourished under the protective umbrella of large, literate empires: the Han in China, the Parthians in Persia, the Romans in the West. These empires provided a new level of security. They suppressed banditry along key stretches, established fortified way stations and caravanserais for rest and resupply, and minted standardized coinage that simplified transactions across cultures. This imperial infrastructure reduced the risk and friction of long-distance travel, inviting a much broader spectrum of society to participate. Yet for all its grandeur, the Silk Road was still built upon the same fundamental social technology perfected in prehistory: trust. A Chinese silk merchant still relied on a chain of intermediaries: Sogdian traders, Parthian middlemen, and finally Roman distributors, to get his goods to a patrician in Rome. It was still, at its heart, a glorified and supercharged version of down-the-line trade. The exotic goods had changed from jade and amber to silk and porcelain, but the human mechanisms of desire, diplomacy, and deferred reciprocity were utterly familiar. This direct comparison reveals a profound truth. The prehistoric networks were the prototype, the successful proof of concept that long-distance Eurasian exchange was not only possible but deeply desirable. They demonstrated which routes worked, which materials held value across cultures, and how to build relationships across vast distances. The Silk Road was not a rupture in history. It was the culmination. It was the ancient whispering network finding its voice, amplified by the organized power of empires and written into the official records of history. The roots of our globalized world do not begin with Zhang Qian's diplomatic missions or Roman lust for silk. They are far older, reaching deep into the silent, collaborative soil of the Stone Age, where the first trade was also the first act of faith in a world beyond the horizon. The world has always been smaller than it appears. From the first volcanic glass blade passed across a river to the golden amber bead placed in a pharaoh's tomb, these stories reveal a single, stunning reality. Our ancient ancestors were not isolated tribes staring into a local fire. They were participants in a vast, whispering conversation that spanned continents. Long before empires or written histories, they were building the first globalizing force, not with conquest, but with curiosity and exchange. This deep human impulse to reach beyond the horizon, to seek out the new and the meaningful, wove the earliest threads of our shared story. These networks were more than economic routes. They were the arteries of civilization itself, carrying not just obsidian and jade, but the very seeds of technology, art, and belief. They shaped languages, forged social hierarchies, and transmitted the blueprints for everything from bronze metallurgy to monumental architecture. The interconnected world we inhabit today is not a modern invention. It is the flowering of a very old, very deep-rooted tendency. We are the inheritors of those ancient pathways, of the trust built between strangers and the stories carried with every shell and stone. If this journey from Anatolian workshops to Central Asian quarries has reshaped your view of the deep past, please let us know by liking this video. Your support helps us continue exploring history's greatest mysteries. And we would love to hear your thoughts below. Of all the ancient treasures that traveled these hidden roads, the sharp black obsidian, the sacred green jade, the glowing golden amber, or the vivid blue lapis lazuli, which one captures your imagination the most?